First tonight, the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, put Australia and the Albanese government on notice today. Unless inflation falls, interest rates will rise. Bullock was unmistakably firm. She's clearly reluctant to lift rates, both for families, but also because it would be an admission her strategy of cuts this year might have been premature. But Bullock was transparent that a hike is on the cards and may be needed next year. She's worried the RBA eased rates too much and says the board is uncomfortable with the current inflation level, which sits at 3.8%.
We didn't consider the case for a rate cut at all. We didn't explicitly consider the case for a rate rise at this meeting, but we did consider and discuss quite a lot the circumstances and what might need to happen if we would decide that interest rates had to rise again at some point next year.
And so the RBA today left rates on hold at 3.6%, but acknowledged a hike may be needed next year if inflation isn't curtailed. And Bullock was crystal clear that she won't tolerate inflation getting out of hand.
If inflation continues to be persistent and looks like it is not coming back down towards the board's target, then I think that does raise questions about how tight financial conditions are, and the board might have to consider whether or not it's appropriate to keep interest rates where they are or, in fact, at some point raise them. But I wouldn't put a timing on that. It's going to be a meeting by meeting.
My criticism of Bullock is that she maintains she's taking a cautious approach. But how cautious was she back in February when the RBA cut interest rates before the federal election? Inflation hadn't returned to target at the time. There wasn't a strong case for a cut, and it seemed to be driven by politics, designed perhaps to help the Albanese government. At the time, we questioned just how much influence Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy had wielded in that decision. And in an unprecedented move, cameras were invited into the RBA board meeting to capture the moment that rates were cut. And that was the first of three. And now the RBA governor is signalling that rates may have to rise. Her strategy could have been wrong. And a journalist asked her about this today.
If the Reserve Bank is forced to lift interest rates next year, would that in hindsight have meant too many rate cuts for 2025?
You could read it that way, but you could also read it and just, if, as I said, you go back 6 or 7 months and a lot of people were saying we needed to drop interest rates quite a lot because things were very, very soft. The board has been cautious. I think that has been borne out.
Bullock will be hoping that this inflation surge is temporary and that she doesn't need to raise rates in the new year. Yet there are now many economists, including from NAB, predicting that February is a live possibility for a rate hike. And Bullock is clearly putting the government on notice. While she was careful not to criticise the Treasurer, she did explicitly say that he was aware of the need to bring down inflation. And of course, his main lever to do this is to cut spending.
They have a lot of things to juggle and at the same time try and make sure that they contribute to bringing inflation down, which I think is very top of mind for them. And whenever I speak to the Treasurer, he's always very conscious of that.
Now listen to Bullock's final line here.
The government at the moment seems focused on what they need to do to continue the fight against inflation, and up until recently I think monetary policy and fiscal policy we were doing a good job.
So that last line is important. She said until recently, monetary and fiscal policy were doing a good job. Well, inflation today is stubborn, uncomfortable in her own words, and well above target. Temporary electricity rebates masked the problem. And Bullock says inflation won't return to the target band of 2 to 3% for another 12 months. Now, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, denies that government spending is to blame for inflation rising, but he does acknowledge that difficult decisions, as he puts it, and cuts are needed.
There will be difficult decisions in the mid-year budget update. There will be savings, as there have been savings in all of our budgets and all of our updates.
Chalmers says the need for restraint is why he's not continuing the electricity rebates, and he warned of tough moves in next week's MyEFO. That's the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. Now, this was a message as much to his colleagues as to the public. But the question is whether the government is willing to make significant spending cuts that would help the RBA to lower inflation. Because Bullock today was firm. If inflation doesn't fall, rates will have to rise. And it's families who'll pay the price.